Hello friends, how are you doing today? My name is Mary and this is Happily Ever Esch. So today I'm sharing with you what I have recently been reading and also what I am currently reading. So I've decided that I like this format a little bit better. I think I'm just a little too long-winded and chatty to talk about all the books and all the things I want to talk about them in a monthly wrap-up. So we're going to try this whole recent reads wrap-up type thing for a couple times. I really enjoyed doing it last time. So I'm going to go ahead and share the 3 books that I have read since the last recent reads video. First one being Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. This was an audiobook. This is a memoir by J.D. Vance. The subtitle on this is, I don't know the title on this is A Memoir of Family and a Culture in Crisis. And this does exactly what it says in the title. It really is a memoir of his family and the culture, which he self-proclaims as hillbilly culture. That is such a huge theme in this. Cultural values of, hill people who have migrated from Kentucky to Ohio is like mainly who he's talking about here. So kind of like the cultural values versus like the fundamental like practices of this culture, and kind of how there is just a little friction there. He talks a ton about his family. He looks kind of at his whole childhood. There's a lot of discussion on loyalty, the good parts of loyalty and being loyal to your family, and also kind of the bad and harmful parts of loyalty, and how he thinks that that's kind of contributing to the cultural crisis of these, hillbilly people. This is very much focusing on a rural setting, and so I identified with that a lot. I grew up in a very small town in the Midwest with about 3,500 people, and so a lot of the things that he's talking about I really can see play out in my own rural hometown that I grew up in. And I think that I was expecting to get more of the social and economic facts and figures, and that's really not what he's doing. He's more looking at his life and kind of working out what's going on. He does use scientific evidence to kind of talk about his life story, but a lot of the things that he did talk about were things that I had experienced in my own life, and so weren't maybe as shocking or jaw-dropping. As at the beginning, like, that's not his aim. His aim is to give a memoir and a story. So I definitely think if you're looking to hear someone's story, especially if you're interested in Midwest, in particular the Rust Belt, and kind of the hillbilly culture, and kind of, I think it does explain a lot about things in recent elections, and kind of why the climate is turning the way that it is. I think that this is a very worthwhile book to pick up. So yeah, definitely a lot about culture, about family, loyalty, and you get some socio and economic policy thrown in there, but very little. That's not really what this book's aim was. So I really enjoyed it. J.D. Vance did the audiobook, and I thought that he had a wonderful voice to listen to, and I thought it added a lot to his story. So definitely one worth checking out if any of those things interest you. The next book that I finished on audio was Still Alice. This is written by Lisa Genova, and this follows Alice, who is a professor at Harvard. She has a very kind of perfect life. She's in her mid or early 50s, not mid 50s, early 50s. She has a husband, she has 3 beautiful children, she's getting ready, to be a grandma, so just all of these beautiful things that are happening in her life, and she is diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. And then we follow Alice after her diagnosis and kind of the effects of the disease of Alzheimer's. I thought that this book gave me a lot of insight on what it would be like for a person who has Alzheimer's disease, and I think that that is a really important perspective to read from, as it affects so many people. I did feel a lot of distance from Alice, and I don't know if that was intentional, because as someone is starting to like lose their memories, you're not going to kind of feel maybe so much of the essence of that person, because there's things that are being lost from them. So maybe that distance was kind of intentional, that kind of distance that you might start to feel from someone who was experiencing the disease. But I also felt like the book was making so much of a point that just because someone has memory loss or suffers from dementia does not mean that they're not a person, that they don't have an essence and a being and a soul. And so I felt like feeling this distance from the character, but also trying to make that point was kind of, I don't know, there was just some tension there. I thought that this book just did a wonderful job of kind of showing you like a study of the progression of the disease, but not so much the character. Yes, you're seeing these clinical things that are affecting them and affecting how you would live your life, but I just felt like there was just no emotion in that. And I believe Lisa Genova is a doctor, and so, you know I had a lot of friends in school who had to read this like in college to study it, and I understand like this would be like a professor's dream book to have to study, because there is so much things that you can dig into and kind of study and pull out and think about. But I just felt like I was lacking that emotional connection to the story. I did take away a lot of like the complexity of the disease and the complexity of like good days versus bad days in someone's head who's maybe experiencing those things and maybe understanding their experiences a little bit more. I also thought there was a beautiful theme of kind of what we carry, our language and our ideas kind of transcend us when we share those things with other people, and I thought that was a beautiful theme running through it. So I definitely think it was a good read. I know a lot of people really love this book, and I definitely can see why. Just for me personally, I felt just so much distance from the characters. It's hard for me to empathize with them because I didn't really care. I was more, interested in like the more clinical and effects of Alzheimer's in the life, and not so much the like emotional effects of the to that family in particular. So definitely enjoyed it, but not my favorite book. And then the last book that I finished, a book that I absolutely loved, is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. I picked this up for Tome Topple and clearly did not finish it anywhere near Tome Topple time, but I am so absolutely glad that I picked this book up. I adored it. This follows the Joad family during the Great Depression and during the Great Migration of farming families from Midwestern states to the West. In particular, this is looking at the migration to California. This focuses on the Joad family, but there's also this beautiful interspersing of these poetic chapters that kind of talk about the migrant group as a whole. And so there is just this big picture collective chapters interspersed, and I just absolutely loved them. They just moved me so much, just thinking about this collective experience. And that is what this book a lot of times is about, is people and common humanity. And so to have those chapters of the group and the whole was just absolutely stunning. This is a story about greed and the abuse of power, but it's also a story about generosity and the human spirit. It's about family and the differences in family and the different roles in family and how that is so important. It's a story about stories and family and the land and connection to things. There's so much hurt in this because of greed, but there's also so much just humanity in that, in greed, in common greed, and seeing it, but also seeing just the generosity of people and just shared experiences and the importance of coming together and sticking together and helping people. This book's also about fear, I think, and how fear drives people, and it drives greed, and it drives people to be really heartless and just to suck until there's nothing left, and it's how fear causes us to look at other people and can really villainize people and drive people to very extreme places of harm, but it's also about how there can be grace in fear, and there can be, instead of fear driving to destruction of others, how it can drive to us together and to build other people up. And we see that through the Joad family and the other migrant families and how they support and love one another, but also how that fear can drive anger, and how that anger can drive change. And so this is just so good. Like, there's just so much goodness in this, and I want everyone to read it. It's an American classic for a reason. There's just so much resiliency and life in these characters, and I absolutely loved it. So I'm going to read you a couple quotes from this book that I absolutely loved. First is talking about stories and sharing stories with each other, and I'm going to read two separate lines that are in two different paragraphs, but it's all kind of talking about the same thing. And they listened while the tales were told, and their participation made the stories great. And the people listened, and their faces were quiet with listening. The storytellers, gathering attention into their tales, spoke in great rhythms, spoke in great words, because the tales were great, and the listeners became great through them. And so I loved that thought of what stories do to us, and how stories are so important and just integral to who we are as people. And then here's kind of talking about the wrath that comes from, fear, especially from people being hungry and being just completely beaten down. And in the eyes of the people there is the failure, and in the eyes of the hungry there is a growing wrath. In the souls of the people, the grapes of wrath are filling and growing heavy for the vintage. So just beautiful writing, beautiful imagery, and just an important story that keeps happening. This isn't just a story that's isolated to this one time. This is a story that is repeated over and over and over again in history, and we need to be reading books like this and be thinking about things and just I don't know. I think this is important. I think it's an important read right now, and I'm definitely going to be picking up more Steinbeck because I adore him, if you couldn't tell. So now on to what I plan to read. I'm having a little bit of a book hangover from the Grapes of Wrath. I was just kind of sitting like, I don't know what to read next. Like, I didn't really want to pick a fantasy. I didn't really want to pick a mystery. I was just kind of at a loss. But then I watched Marissa's channel over at Blatantly Bookish. I'll put her channel up here, her novella-a-thon wrap-up, and she talked about The Driver's Seat by Muriel Sparks. It's a short little novella. It's like 100 pages, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to read this tonight. I think it'll be a nice little palate cleansing book. She gave it a glowing review. I've heard a lot of people really enjoy this book, so I just was like, yes, this is exactly what I need in between, starting maybe some more big books. So hopefully I'll finish this one tonight. Also reading Treats by Laura Williams. This is a collection of short stories. I've read a couple of them. I don't think this is going to be my favorite collection, but they're fine stories to read, and I will finish it and let y'all know what I think when I'm done with this. And then I have a couple other options for picking things up. I still haven't got to The Cruelest Month by Louise Penny. I missed my April, but it's still springtime, so still reading it in the appropriate season, and maybe pick this up this weekend. Also have Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery that I'm really, really hoping to get to soon. And then The Blue Girl by Lori Foos. So we'll pick another one of these, or one or two of these up this weekend. So I'd love to know what you're reading, what you've recently read that you adored. I'd love to chat with you about The Grapes of Wrath if you loved it. If you didn't, tell me. I want to chat about it. And I hope that you guys are going to have a great weekend. It is sunny here in the Midwest, and I am happy about that because we've had lots of rain. We got washed away, but the sun finally has graced us with its presence, and I'm so excited. So I hope that you guys have a great weekend, and I hope to talk to y'all soon. Bye.